Before we start the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. And now, let's go.
Story 1.
I should have trusted my instinct and canceled the reservation when I first saw its symbols. I should have followed the house rules and never entered that room. My wife and I reached our vacation rental in the mountains. When we saw the listing, we knew it was the one for our long weekend getaway. It was a small guest house with a private entrance, green space, a deck, and a small backyard tucked against the pines. The house is removed from downtown, yet only a short 15-minute drive to bars and restaurants. Perfect. We checked ourselves in using the keypad. My wife waited in the car while I swept the house. A precaution we always take can never be too safe. I'll be right back. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. At first glance, the home looked recently updated and even nicer than the listing photos. Darcy is going to love this place, I said out loud. The floors appeared to be the original hardwood planks. Large picture windows with views of the surrounding forest and mountains lined the walls. A fireplace anchored the main living area, hugged by a cozy sofa and love seat. I proceeded to the kitchen. On the counter next to the farmhouse sink, a note. Welcome to Pine House. To make your stay as enjoyable as possible, please do not deviate from our house rules. The house is old. Pipes will make noise. Don't be alarmed. Don't enter the woods after 11 p.m. I paused for a moment and tried to make sense of the demands. I reread the note, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. What do the symbols mean? And why would someone go into the woods at night? No reason to alarm Darcy. I hid the note in a drawer and continued my sweep of the house. I opened the pantry and found a coffee maker and a few extra bowls and pans, nothing unusual. On the way to the primary bedroom, there was a door with a keypad lock and a small frame note reading, "For host use only." Typical of rental properties. The primary bedroom had high ceilings and a king-size bed covered in pillows. It smelled fresh like lavender. I opened the closet, found a few hangers, then looked through the en-suite bath, all clear. Only the guest bedroom remained. As I entered the spare room, I was suddenly met with the foul stench of wet earth and decay. Before I could pinpoint the source of the repulsive smell, my attention quickly snapped to the back of the room. The back door was left wide open. My heart skipped a beat. I moved quickly toward the door to peer outside, looking for any signs of disturbance. In the distance, another house nestled deeply into the woods was visible. It had a single window illuminated near the pitch of the roof, giving away position. It was an old frame painted deep black, camouflaging it amongst the trees in the darkening sky. The slate-colored dwelling almost looked like it was alive, feeding on the forest. Stalking this house with its single lit-up eye, watching me, I felt drawn in, almost under a spell. I couldn't look away, as though the structure put me into a trance state. H.E.Y. My wife bellowed sharply as she lurched at me. Jesus, you scare the living hell out of me. She always got a kick out of startling me. It worked a little too often. Watch us staring at? At least my wife hadn't seen the door unlocked, wide open for anyone curious enough to sneak in. She was also spared the image of the black dwelling in the woods, and its lone gaze devouring the forest seared into her mind. Nothing. She would have demanded that we cancel and find another place. I pulled myself away, shut the door, and twisted the deadbolt. That night, without warning, I woke up abruptly. 3 sounds reverberated from somewhere inside the house. The first sound was sharp, the second dull and drawn out, the last booming. Knock. Drag, B-A-N-G-G. I looked anxiously at the clock. 2:17 a.m. I grabbed my phone and pocket knife from the nightstand, quietly slipped out of bed, and began to search the house. As I moved between rooms, the floorboards moaned, aching from old age. The air was still, and I could hear myself breathing heavily. My heart was pounding as I found my way through the dark, unfamiliar home. I made it to the guest room and checked the back door. It wasn't open, but it also wasn't locked. Shit. I opened the door to survey the backyard. The forest was pitch black now. Even the house deep in the woods was blanketed in darkness, the window no longer lit. I let out a deep sigh of relief, stepped back inside, and locked the door tightly. Breathe. The house is old. Pipes will make noise. Don't be alarmed. The next evening, a little after 11:30 p.m. We had just finished watching a movie and were ready to call a night. This time, I double-checked both external doors. After the first day, I wasn't taking any chances. First, the front door locked tight. I started walking toward the guest room. Through the window off the kitchen, I could hear the wind howling. The trees were violently swaying in the darkness. The window was open, and the earthy smell of evergreen invaded the room. I made my way to the back door to find it was wide open again. Shit. In the distance, in front of the decaying house in the woods, a bonfire had been ignited. Its flames shot up through the canopy of the trees, threatening the night. The flickering orange light danced amongst the canopy of the forest. The thick, heavy smell of smoke circulated in the midnight air. Against better judgment, I exited the house, closing the distance between me and the edge of the woods. I made my way onto a small path that cut through the forest toward the Ephraim, advancing quietly toward the fire. A dozen yards in, I saw something tucked between the trees. A silhouette of a person standing 30 yards away. They weren't moving. They just stood there. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel them gazing directly at me, like they'd been watching me the entire time. A wave of anxiety and panic washed over my mind. My heart beat against my chest. Run back to the house. Don't enter the woods after 11 p.m. The next night, I was jolted awake. 2:17 a.m. again. There were noises resonating from inside the house. This time, the sounds were long, jagged like teeth, and clawing against walls. Scratch. Scratch. Darcy woke up. She looked panicked, pale, as if she'd seen a ghost. Did you hear the scratch? The hair on my neck stood straight up, nerves on fire. I jumped out of bed, slowly moved into the living room, and past the kitchen. As I turned the corner, I saw it. The back door was wide open. No, not again. I looked at the adjacent wall of the guest room. This time, the closet door was also gaping open. The dresser inside moved to the right, exposing a hole that led to a hidden room. A crawl space that shouldn't be there. It didn't fit the layout of the house. My nerves electrified like lightning and coursed through my body. My mind and body screamed to turn the other way. But after everything I'd seen and been through, I just had to know. I crouched down and made my way inside the crawl space. I turned on the flashlight and began canvassing the hollow space. The air was still. There were no windows. The floors were unfinished and made of earth. The room smelled like decay, damp with a faint hint of copper. In the center of the room was an object I couldn't quite make out. I moved nervously closer. My heart pounded, tried to escape my chest. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. A black box. It looked heavy, about 12 inches square. A thick red liquid was seeping from the bottom across the dirt floor. I froze as I further inspected the box. On the upper right corner, 2 symbols were imprinted in wet ebony paint. Suddenly, I heard Darcy dart into the guest room behind me. She sounded panicked. "Where are you?" she cried. "Whatever you do not come in here, we have to leave," I said desperately. "Darcy, pack up our things and get in the car. I'll be right behind you." "What the hell is going on?" "I'll explain on our way home. Right now, I just need you to trust me. We need to leave now." I began to make my way out of the crawl space when I suddenly felt a hand grab my left ankle, dragging me back inside. I tried to kick free, screaming in horror, but its grip was too tight. I turned around quickly to see what had me in its clutches. It was a woman wearing a cloak. Her long, jet black hair spewed out from the opening of the hood, covering most of her sunken face. Her arms were long and spindly. Her hands were twisted. Her long nails were sharp, broken, and black. She released me as I saw her pull a knife from inside her cloak. She managed to plunge the knife into my shoulder, barely missing vital organs. I could hear her chanting words under her breath. I screamed in horror as she twisted the knife, wrenching it deeper into my flesh. She quickly pulled the blade out as a river of blood ran down my arm. If I don't act now, I'm never leaving this house alive. I grabbed a handful of dirt from the floor and threw it in her face. She dropped the knife to shield her face and wipe away the earth. This is my chance. My heart racing, shoulder throbbing, I crawled as quickly as I could out of the hidden room. I got to my feet and ran out the front door. Darcy had already started the car, headlights on, ready to escape. I hauled down the long, narrow dirt road away from the house. Darcy was in shock, crying, and I felt overwhelmed with panic. As we continued to descend the driveway, I took one last glance in the rearview mirror of the guest house. The front door was now wide open. The witch was running out of the house, knife in hand running after the car, shrieking. She reached the end of the driveway and abruptly stopped. She was just standing there, staring, as we continued to drive away, the house vanishing from view. An hour later, Darcy was still understandably distraught. She interrupted the silence. "WH, why was there a hidden room behind the closet? Why are you bleeding?" I didn't know how to explain what had happened. The witch was living in the house. In that secret room, we'd broken her rules.
Story 2.
The light that bled through the sand-colored canvas walls of the briefing tent was the color of sickness. It did nothing to keep out the Kandahar heat which pressed in from all sides, a patient and searching thing that found its way beneath my fatigues to lay claim to the skin. My team, called Ares 1, sat on trembling folding chairs about a table of scavenged plywood. We were the men they sent for when the world went crooked in a way that powder and ballistics could not account for. We were ghosts sent to hunt the same. Across the warped wood from me sat Elias Vance, who we called Deacon, and he polished the dark eye of his spotter scope with a studied and nearly unholy calm. His quiet was a stone island in the river of my own disquiet. To my left, Corporal Ramirez, called Rico, worked a toothpick from one corner of his mouth to the other. His leg beat out a jittering beat against the packed and barren earth, a secret and anxious heart. Our medic, Specialist Miller, a man known only as Doc, was scratching in a notepad with the lead of a pencil. He made drawings of bones and organs as a cartographer might map a strange and broken country, for he saw all the world as a thing to be mended. And by the projector screen stood the lieutenant, a boy named Wallace Fresh from the academy, and he stood so rigid that you knew he feared he might break apart if he moved. Colonel Matthews parted the canvas flap and entered the heat. He was a man whose face was of sun and bad wars, and he did not believe in the husbandry of words. All right, listen up. A wan and sterile light bloomed against the screen. It showed a geometry of sand-filled barriers and tents, a fleeting human scar upon a land that would not long suffer it. The outpost was a child's toy set at the feet of a jagged spine of mountains. The Hindu Kush, a boneyard of nations. "This is forward operating base Kilo 7, Matthews said, and his voice was flat as a shovel blade. As of 0400 yesterday, it went dark. Rico's toothpick fell from his mouth and lay dead in the dust. Taliban, that's the assumption we're working with, Matthews said, but the truth of his eyes was a different and harder thing. A company from the 10th Mountain was stationed there. 68 souls. Kilo 7, unofficially known as the Devil's Anvil, was established 3 months ago to monitor suspected smuggling routes to the Toragar Range. He touched a key and the image grew, the camera closing on the wound. You could see no fire and no ruin and no sign of the violence of man. It only looked scoured clean. Empty. Radio's dead. No distress call. No satellite pings from their emergency beacons. A drone passed this morning showed no signs of life. No bodies, no hostiles. Just nothing. A quiet fell in the tent, then, that was older and heavier than our own. Command wants this buttoned up quiet. They're worried it was a new chemical agent, maybe a mass desertion, though God knows where a man would desert to in that country. Your job, Sergeant Carter, he said, and his eyes found mine and held them, is to take your team, fly in, assess the situation, and report back. Find out what happened to those men. Just us, sir, I asked, and the question felt small. A cold stone of a thing had settled low in my gut. A 5-man team for 68 ghosts. You're fast and you're discreet. If we send in a battalion, it will become an international incident. We need eyes on the ground before we kick the hornet's nest. Find out what we're dealing with. He looked from my face to the faces of the others, as a man might look at his tools before a hard job. You're the best I've got. Get it done. The Black Hawk was a vessel of noise and bad nerves. We flew low and we flew fast, and the height of the country below was a ruined and cast-off thing, a brown cloth crumpled in God's fist. Then the mountains rose to meet us. When the outpost came into the view, it was as the drone had shown it. Abandoned. A ghost town made of sand and wire. The pilot set us down 50 meters out, and the wash from the rotors raised up a blinding country of dust. The moment the engine spooled into silence, a new silence came for us. There were no generators humming, no talk from distant men, not even the small life of insects. Only the thin and sorrowful cry of the wind as it passed through the coils of razor wire, like a paid mourner. "All right, Wallace, you're on point," I said into that quiet. "Rico, you got our 6. Deacon, find some high ground. Doc, stick with me." We moved in the manner of men who hunt what hunts them, our rifles sweeping the dead air. The gate to the compound stood open like a mouth that had forgotten what it meant to close. Inside we found a war in miniature left unfinished on a crate. A Humvee with its hood raised to the sky like a supplicant, and beside it on a tarp were its own steel guts laid out with a terrible neatness. In the mess tent a plate of food sat petrified upon a table, the bodies of flies entombed in the hardened blood of a ketchup bottle. "No blood, no brass," Rico's voice said in the calms. "They didn't even get a shot off." Then came Deacon, his voice a ghost from a higher place. "Got a perch on the south watchtower, Sergeant. I see nothing. No tracks leading out. It's like they just evaporated." We went through the barracks tent by tent, parting the canvas flaps of these tombs. And each one was the same. The cots were made with a crisp and meaningless order. There were photos of women and children taped to the footlockers, small paper talismans that had failed. There were books with their spines broken on the nightstands. This was not the work of men who had fled. You do not leave the picture of your little girl. This was an erasure. This was a thing worse. There was a taste upon the air. It was a strange and coppery thing that carried with it a faint and sickly sweetness. The taste of shed blood, but beneath it something else. Something feral. "Sarge, you gotta see this," Doc Miller called from behind the comms tent. We found him on his knees beside a great steel shipping container. And there was the first sermon of the violence. Down the side of the container were 3 gouges raked through the metal, which was peeled back like the rind of some bitter fruit. The furrows were a foot apart. "No animal I know of could do that," Doc said. "Look at the edges. Not sharp like claws. They're serrated." A coldness that had nothing to do with the mountain air moved through me. I followed the scent and the line of Doc's gaze around the container, and we saw where the men of Kilo 7 had gone. They were piled in the long shadow of a HESCO barrier. All 68 of them were the parts that remained. Bodies were unmade with a hunger that knew nothing of mercy or war. Limbs torn from their sockets. Torsos cracked open like seed pods and scoured clean. These men had not been killed. They had been butchered. They had been fed upon. I had seen what bombs and bullets do to the bodies of men, but this was a new and darker testament. This was not the work of any man. Doc Miller turned and was sick in the sand. Wallace stood a statue of disbelief, his face the color of leached stone. Even Rico was silent, his hand a white-knuckled claw upon the stock of his weapon. What in God's name?" Wallace said. My eyes followed a dark and clotted path in the sand that led away from the carnage. It did not lead to the gate. It led straight for the sheer rock of the mountain that stood judgment over us all. And there, held in the shadow of an overhang, was a black negation in the stone. A cave. The smell was stronger there. "Deacon, you see this?" My own voice sounded like a stranger's. "I see it, Sarge. A cave mouth. The drag marks lead right to it." And the truth of it settled on me. The answer was not in the outpost. The answer was in that black and waiting hole. Whatever had done this had come down from the mountain, and it had dragged its prizes home. "We can't go in there," Wallace said, his voice a brittle thing he had just found. "We should report back. Call in an airstrike. Level the whole damn mountain." "The colonel's orders were to assess, Lieutenant," I said, and every true and terrified part of me clamored to agree with the boy. "We don't know what we're dealing with. If it's a new kind of biological agent, bombing it could spread it for miles. We need intel." "Jake's right." Deacon's voice came over the radio, a steady thread to the world of the sun. We don't go in blind, but we have to look. I'll stay on overwatch. I can see the entrance from here. And so the judgment was passed. We readied ourselves in a kind of grim sacrament, swapping our rifles for the close-quarters weapons that would prove to be little more than folk magic against such a dark. I took up the shotgun, and we hung upon our bodies every grenade we carried. With Deacon as our anchor to the world of light, we four walked to the cave. At its mouth the air turned its back on the sun, and the heat was leached from your skin by a cold that had been waiting there for a very long time. The darkness within was a solid thing, a wall of absolute black that drank the beams of our weapon lights and gave nothing back. "Rico, your point," I said into the quiet. "Move slow. Sound off every 10 meters." We stepped across that threshold, and the world of sun and logic fell away behind us. We entered a new province. The floor of the cave was slick with some dark ichor I did not wish to name. The passage was a narrow gullet, the rock of it damp and cold to the touch. Our lights drew frantic patterns over the walls which bore the fossil record of some forgotten nightmare. After 20 meters the throat of it opened, and we stood in a great and lightless cathedral. Here were the nests. They were obscene totems woven from the scavenged fabric of uniforms and the coils of razor wire and hanks of what could only be human hair. And scattered in, and among them were the bones of men, gnawed and splintered and cracked. "Jesus Christ," Wallace breathed. "It's a lair." Then a sound. It rose from the depths, and it echoed in that great and hollow dark. It was not a growl, nor was it a shriek. It was a wet and chittering click, the sound of 1,000 mandibles working in unison, a sound that bypassed the ear and settled in the oldest part of the soul. It came from all around, from the black mouths of tunnels unseen, from the crevices in the rock above us. "Contact!" Rico yelled, but he did not know where to aim his rifle. And then they peeled themselves from the shadows. They wore the shape of men, but they were a blasphemy of that shape. Taller than a man, and with limbs that were too long and which bent at obscene angles. Their skin was the pale and venous white of a grub's belly, and it was stretched thin over the hard knots of their muscle and the protrusion of their bones. Where their eyes should have been, there was only a puckered and seamless flesh, a blind judgment. Their jaws unhinged, and their faces split open to show a palisade of bone needles for teeth. And they moved with the twitching and silent quickness of hunting birds, their serrated claws scrabbling on the stone. The first of them fell from the ceiling with no sound at all, and it landed behind Lieutenant Wallace. Before the mind could rightly tell the eye what it was seeing, an arm of impossible length speared through the lieutenant's chest from behind, erupting from his sternum in a wet and glistening spike. He made a soft exhalation of blood and ruin, his eyes wide with a final and damning surprise. The creature ripped its arm back, and the lieutenant folded into the stone, and the world contracted to the muzzle flash of our guns and the clamor of our screaming. "Open fire!" I roared, and the cavern devoured the sound as if it had never been. Rico answered with the M249, and its bellow was a blind and hammered prayer in that rock. The tracers knit a seam of red ruin in its pale hide, and it let out a shriek that set the teeth to grinding in your own skull. It fell back a step, but it did not fall down, and two more came out of the black to take its place. My shotgun spoke its one word into the dark, and the face of the nearest thing became a shredded clump of meat. But it did not stop. It came on, its eyeless head a ruin of raw flesh and needle teeth, and I fired again, and its head became a wet gospel of bone and gore that spattered the cavern wall. "They're everywhere," Doc yelled, and his M4 spoke in quick and reasoned bursts that did no good. "Fall back to the entrance." But the way we had come was choked with them now. A new tide of them pouring from the gullet of the cave, their clicking a dissonant choir that unwound the mind. We were entombed. One of them was on Rico as his weapon ran dry. He drove the barrel into its split-toothed maw, but the gun gave only a dead man's click. The thing's jaws closed on the barrel and bent the steel. Another came at him from the side, and its claws unzipped his armor and the flesh beneath as if it were muslin cloth. He made a high and final sound of terror that was severed by the crunch of bone, and I saw his legs kicking at the empty air as they bore him away into a blacker dark. "Rico's down. He's gone," I cried into the radio. "Sarge, I'm coming to you," Deacon's voice said. "Hold on." A thing hit me from the side, and its weight was a sinewy and shocking truth. The reek of its breath was a hot and graveyard thing on my face, and its teeth scraped and probed at my helmet's visor, seeking a way in. I put the barrel of my shotgun to the place its throat would be and sent my last shell home. The recoil was a judgment against my shoulder, but the monster's head ceased to be. I scrambled away from the body and drew my pistol. "Doc!" To me. I saw him then, Doc Miller, on his knees by the ruin of Wallace. He was a man made of medicine, and all his learning was of no account here. He was just staring at the butchery, at a body unmade in a way his science could not comprehend. "Miller, move!" I screamed. He looked up at me, and his face was a pale moon of catatonia. Two of them came upon him, one from each side. He made no sound at all as they took him apart. And the wet and rending sound of man unmade is a sound that has a room in me forever. I was alone. The clicking was a closing circle. I was a man already dead in a stinking cave at the bitter end of the world. Then came a crack from the cave mouth. The thing stalking me collapsed with a hole drilled through its chest cavity. "Jake, this way." It was Deacon. He stood in the narrow tunnel mouth like a man sent from another and better world. His sniper rifle, a tool of distance and patience, was now a brutal cudgel in the close dark. He fired again and again, and each shot was a commandment that found a home in the writhing shapes before us, buying me a breath, then another. I ran and scrambled past him into the narrow stone. They got them. I gasped, the foul air of poison in my throat. "They got them all. I know," he said, and his face was grim stone as he chambered another round. "We have to block this passage. We make our stand here." He kicked at the wall, and a small torrent of rock and scree fell to partly block the tunnel behind us. A fleeting bit of work against a hunger that had all of time. We were two men against a hive, trapped in the anvil's gut. We could hear them beyond the loose rock of our barricade, a dry and scratching sound, a tireless industry of hunger. The chittering never ceased. "How many mags you got?" Deacon asked, and his voice was calm in that howling dark. "2 for my pistol." "You." 1.5 for the rifle," he said. "Maybe 20 rounds. Not enough. Not in all the world would that be enough." "Sarah," I whispered. The name was a prayer said to a God who was not listening. I saw her face and her belly round with the child I would never see. A laugh came out of me, a dry and broken thing. "Don't do that, Jake," Deacon said, his voice soft but with a hard edge of command. "Don't check out. Stay with me." He was right. I shook my head to cast out the ghosts. "Okay, what's the play, Deacon?" He peered back, down the passage, toward the thin hope of daylight. "We can't stay here. They'll claw through, or they'll wait us out. Our only chance is a straight run for the Hellos radio. Through the outpost? They could be out there, too. Better out there in the sight of God than in here." The scraping on the rocks grew frantic. A pale and 3-fingered hand wormed its way through a gap. My pistol bucked in my hand, and the hand vanished with a thin shriek. "It's now or never," Deacon said. He held a fragmentation grenade in his palm. "On my go. I'll throw this, you run. Don't look back. Don't stop. Get to that chopper and call a fire mission on this godforsaken rock." "What about you?" I asked, though I knew the answer. He gave me a smile that was a sad and fleeting thing. "The sniper's job is to cover the retreat." He pressed a small, worn cross into my palm, its metal warm from his body. "Go home, Jake." "No, we go together. There's no time for both of us," he said, and his voice was iron and it was judgment. The barricade was giving way, a great stone shifting to show a leering and eyeless face. "You have something to go home to. I just have my sins to answer for. Now go." He pulled the pin and let the spoon fly, and counted 2 heartbeats before he lobbed it over the rocks. "For the Lord is my shepherd," he roared into the black. I did not hesitate. The moment the grenade left his hand, I turned and I ran. I ran down that slick, dark passage toward the light and did not know a man could run so fast. The grenade went off behind me, and the concussion was a great hand that shoved me forward. And behind the roar of the blast came the flat crack of Deacon's rifle, and the shrieking of the damned, and the sound of a good man's final stand. I came out of the cave and into the blinding sun, and the clean air was a grace I did not deserve. I did not look back. I ran across that dead compound, past the silent cots and the frozen game, and the shades of 68 men ran with me. I was almost to the helicopter when it came from the roof of the comms tent. It must have found another way out of the rock. It was a great bull of a thing, its pale hide scarred and mottled with age, and it landed before me and cut off the world. It hissed, a sound of triumph, and its face split open. My pistol was a useless weight in my hand. My rifle was in the cave. There was no soldier left in me then, only an animal that had been shown its own grave and did not care for it. I lunged and took up a heavy wrench that lay by the Humvee. The thing swiped at me, and its claws drew 4 red furrows through my body armor and into the meat of my chest. The pain was a fire, but it did not matter. I swung the wrench and gave it all my hate and fear, and it connected with the side of its head with a sound like a melon breaking on stone. It reeled, and I swung again and again. I did not stop swinging until its eyeless face was a ruin of pulp and gore and shattered bone. It fell twitching, and I stood over it, my breath a ragged saw in my lungs, my chest a wall of fire, and the small cross clutched hard in my fist. I stumbled into the Black Hawk and fell upon the radio, my hand leaving a bloody smear on the dials. Mayday, 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 I rasped, my voice of strangers. This is Sergeant Carter, Aries 1. Kilo, 7 is compromised. Bring hell. Bring everything you have. Burn it all. Burr the mountain. I came to a room of sterile white in Landstuhl, Germany. The clean sheets felt a stranger to my skin. Sarah was asleep in a chair beside the bed, her hand laid upon the swell of her belly where our son was waiting to be born. And for a moment I let the lie in, that it had all been a fever dream come upon me in that land of dust. And then you'd draw a breath, and the fire would wake in your chest where they'd sewn you up, and you'd see the thick ghost of the bandages, and you would know it was true. Men in uniforms that held a press, which knew nothing of dirt or blood, sat across a polished table and listened. I told them of the cave and the nests made of wire and hair. I told them of the eyeless things and the bone claws. I told them how Rico was taken and how Doc was unmade and how the boy Wallace fell without a sound and how Deacon went to meet his God with his rifle singing. I told it all. When I was done, the colonel who ran the thing steepled his fingers, and he looked at me not as a man, but as a problem to be solved. He said, "Sergeant, you've been through a severe trauma. The men of the 10th Mountain were set upon by a force of insurgents of a great and terrible number. And in your state of shock, your mind, Sergeant, has conjured a myth to paper over a reality that was merely ugly and without larger meaning. They had dropped the fire on the coordinates I gave them, you see. They had scoured that piece of the mountain back to the bedrock and made of it a monument of black glass. They were burying the cave, and they were burying the truth in it. The official paper would speak of an ambush and overwhelming force. The paper would speak of a sole survivor, a Sergeant Carter whose mind had come unseated by the horrors of men. It was a neater story. They gave me a medal for the blood I had lost and an honorable discharge in a folder that said I was a whole man fit for the world again. And I came home, and I held my wife, and I was there to see my son Leo born. I try to be the man they have a right to, but when the day is done and the house is quiet and my eyes close, I am back in the mountain's gut. I see the pale limbs moving in the strobing light of the guns. I hear the wet and endless chittering. I hear the sound of a man coming apart in the dark. And I hear Deacon's final prayer shouted in the black. A man who survives is not a man who is whole. For you leave pieces of yourself in the places where your brothers fall. And some part of me is still in that cave, buried under the turned rock and fire, in the shadow of the devil's anvil. There are nights I lie awake and the house is still, and I can feel the great weight of the world's darkness, and I think a thought that is a cold stone in my soul. They put their report in a file. They buried the truth under rock and lies. But what if that stone is just a seal upon one tomb among many? What if this world has other such cellars deep in its high and lonely places? What if the things that live in the dark are not gone, but but are only waiting. I survived, but the war is not over. It is a war fought in the quiet of the night against an enemy no one else has ever seen. And I'm a lonely watchman on a wall that no one else knows is there. That's it for today's creepy Reddit tales. Before we go, I just want to say a quick thanks to all of you for watching, liking, and sticking around. You guys keep this channel going, and I'll be back soon with more stories that'll make your skin crawl. Drop a comment if you've got your own spooky tale to share, and I'll see you in the next one.